All right, so we come back here. So we kind of left off a little bit about violent crime. And so we'll sort of distinguish between two major types of crime, violent and property crime. So we'll start a little bit with violent crime. So violent crime. So we have this, right? And maybe this would be good if you guys did on kind of like on your own. You can kind of draw around, come up with your own ideas, right? And so, like, just think about this. Like, what kind of emotions, what kind of thoughts are coming up in the head, right? So when we think about this, right, we know we'll draw out like little different colors for this one. So we think about violent crime, right? We know this is typically uses what, right? So we know we're using force, right? So we know that is certainly like one component. So we have this use of force that comes into place. And we also know that sometimes, right, there is definitely physical, right? So, where you are going to physically use force on someone, right? Although that doesn't necessarily need to be the case, right? When we think about this, when we have physical, it can also just be verbal or the threat of using force, right? So if it's like a verbal kind of thing that kind of comes out, right? You're speaking, hey, I'm going to give you a knuckle sandwich right in the teeth, right? Like that is a verbal threat that I'm using for that, right? So there's also instances where this is something that is right? What we try to do, we're using force or using physical verbal threat, right? We're committing this action. So this is often against other people. I don't know that you can necessarily be arrested for killing yourself. Well, one, because you're dead, right? Or punching yourself. You maybe get a 5150 or something like that if it's severe enough, right? But this is definitely against other people. It's also used, to get something, right? So I'm using this force. I'm going to give you this knuckle sandwich. And for what? Sometimes, right? And usually in some ways, it's in form of coercion. So you have something that I want. You're not, maybe I asked you nicely, or perhaps I didn't. And it can be, any kind of different ways about it, right? We also know that sometimes we can use this force to be, it's instrumental. So it is used to accomplish something for us, right? So perhaps that is to steal something. Perhaps that is to, take something away from someone, maybe improve my financial position. If I want to hijack an aircraft or something like that, if I want to steal someone's car, if I want to hold someone up and steal their stuff, that could be a different way. Or in some ways, right, this is also a form of expression. So there are expressive violence, right? So this would be things where someone's caught up in a rage. They walk in, they see their partner sleeping with someone else, they're not a designated throuple, and you're blinded by your rage and you punch them, right? Or maybe, you have some other negative violent emotion that is pushing you into this kind of behavior, right? So if we think about violent crime, right, we should see that all these things are sort of interrelated and they're linked to one another, right? So we think about these kinds of things. And so just as a sign of like different kind of behaviors that come into it, right? We're talking about your classic murder. Obviously, we're talking about robberies as well. We also include sexual assault, rape. We are talking about, these are things that are also include kidnapping. We're stealing someone through force, right? We're using, if it's just like shooting up someplace, it's also, just like an assault that comes in. And so it can kind of, or just be like in Texas, there's this thing called fighting words. So you're threatening to fight. So, you could just use violent language as well, which is sufficient to be a crime in Texas. It might be in California too, I'm not sure. So the point being, right, is that this is something I'm calling it's called a concept map, right? So we see like purple, like we think more about like the definition kind of stuff, right? And then the green shows the kind of actions that are all related to violent crime, right? So hopefully it kind of makes sense to you. And if it doesn't, I'm sorry. I was just trying something new. We're going to do it again. Right? So I'm sorry. So let's think about a different type of crime that we think about, right? So something else that's super common. So we'll pick a new color again. So, man, what color? Oh, man, this is a pretty ballin' color, right? So we also have property crimes. So let's think about like what's going in, right? So we have our little concept. And if y'all were here, we could do this together, but you're not, so we can't. I'm sorry. Okay, so when we think about this, right, so obviously we're talking about, someone's property. So these involve possessions of some kind, right? So when you think about, what your property is in some kind of way, right, we can think about that, this is used for what, right? So we're used to gain in some way. It could also be something that is used to destroy. So, like, that could be I destroyed your window with my baseball because you were an Angels fan or something, or I break into your home to steal something, and something like that, right? So we have, this destruction component. We also have the, the gain. So I get something from that, right? So when we think about like these kinds of crimes, right? They're usually in most cases, these are instrumental crimes. Back to my color. So they're instrumental, right? They serve a purpose to us, right? So, if I'm stealing something of yours, I'm using it, maybe I'm going to use it for myself, perhaps I'm going to sell it or something like that. Or if I'm going to destroy something, perhaps that serves some sort of purpose as well, right? There's usually, not in some cases. There are instances where it is expressive. It can be expressive, but we usually don't think of it that way. If we think about expressive, how is it expressive? If you think about like a riot where people are expressively destroying their property or something like that, that usually tends not to be the case. That's sort of like a special outlier. So just know that like going forward, right? And so what kind of behaviors do we usually see for this, right, that pop up? So we use a different color for this. Sorry, it's not more of a spider network, but we're just learning here, right? So when we think about these different property crimes, we also know that there are going to be things related to, so we have basic theft, right, where we just pop into a store, we steal something from that store, it is now mine. So you go to the Circle K, you get a Polar Pop and perhaps a Butterfinger bar, and you're set for a great time. That was another sip of coffee. We also know with property crime, this could be things like burglary, where we're not only stealing property, but we're going into someone's homes, right? Key distinction between burglary and robbery: robbery uses force to get what you want. Burglary, less likely to use force in that. When people like come home like, we've been robbed, no, you've been burgled, right? And that's a key distinct difference, right? But we also have issues that, let's say, vandalism. So things like graffiti, something that's owned by like the state or public. So someone put in, Latin Kings live here, or Crips, 210 live here, or something like that. It could also be, it could be like any kind of civil rights thing. But if it's not allowed, then it is a form of destroying property. You're altering it in some way to do that. Or in another case, right, it could be arson, where you're using fire to destroy property, whether that's your own. So let's say that you had some bank records that were in place. You thought that, you weren't going to get caught. You ended up getting caught. Maybe you are burning or destroying evidence of a crime of some kind. Maybe you already murdered someone and you're using arson to do that. Who knows, right? Or if you're one of the people that work for like CAL FIRE or something like that, who were caught, like intentionally setting fire so they could always get overtime pay. Those are examples of like where arson is used. It's destroying property that's owned by someone, and it's instrumental because it leads to a gain of some kind, right? So those are sort of like the chief ones, crimes that we'll talk about mainly in this course. So we'll sort of like leave it right here, and we'll start moving into ways that we collect